All right, let's continue with the reading. There's a lot ahead. Again, this is from The Campaigner, Journal of the National Caucus of Labor Committee, 1978. A watershed year for many reasons, which we'll get into. But again, we're exploring this, the idea that there has been for several millennia a fundamental, irreconcilable schism within the elite, separating one faction, which you might say loosely is the pirate faction, favoring speculation and banking and usury and the worst forms of imperialism and colonialism, and then on the other side, the other faction being nation states, city builders, development-oriented, Italian Renaissance, 1776. And we see here on the cover we have, this is an article by Lyndon LaRouche, The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites, Aristotle versus Plato, which I would say the pirate faction has tried to smooth out or erase any dichotomy between these two figures and sort of smeared them together and insisted that Aristotle was a student of Plato and everything's hunky-dory, when in fact we see you can identify these factions by which figure they aligned with in their epistemology. So let's continue reading. And I think in positing this schism and studying it with kind of urgency as we try to understand the world, the events swirling around us, and as that's very difficult, partly because we have this artificial dichotomy, this synthetic or fake left-right paradigm that we have to struggle with. Again, my feeling is that there's probably a lot of answers in this article, and we'd do well to look deeper than the left-right paradigm. Of course, we should challenge ourselves to look beyond our personal sympathies. And of course, I don't think people who listen to this channel are aligned with party politics in any way. But I guess one question might be, well, what difference does it make what the elites decide to do or not? We should rise up, the people, and do what's right. But to be honest, my position is that that's not really possible, that we're overmatched and outflanked and controlled in every way, and that to resist this fundamental order of things would be a waste of time at this point, but that I look with hope to the idea that there is a schism and that there are elites who have a store of deep knowledge that's vastly superior to the kinds of sinister shenanigans that we've been treated to for the last, many centuries. And I think you can see what happened with 1776, how it was quickly, not that quickly. I mean, I would say the Republic survived. It survived the War of 1812. It got through the Civil War, which was really another war of independence, which was also a global conflict, and limped along and reached I would say, kind of realization of its stated principles after the Civil War, when the United States was a beacon of hope as the only viable alternative to British imperialism, and spreading technology and the cooperative spirit. And then following that, we go into the 20th century, very mixed. We have the Federal Reserve, we have the entry into World War I, despicable decisions, and we it's a bit up and down, and then we get to John F. Kennedy, and then we see, I would call the assassination of John F. Kennedy a coup. So as we look at the situation today, do we see hope? As we look at it's very, very difficult to get a bead on what the so-called elites, I call them elites, I'm talking about the very powerful aristocratic families. I'm talking about the House of Bourbon Two Sicilies. I'm talking about the House of Savoy. I'm talking about the House of Hesse. I'm talking about the House of Hanover. I'm talking about the Windsors, Pallavicini, Massimo, Medici. I could list more. Those are the ones that stand out for me now, and I don't think people in general, I know that they don't have a proper appreciation of just how powerful these families still are. And my question is there among these families, or within them, or individuals, or groups, or groupings, is there now ascending a kind of resurgence of the old, the spirit of the Ghibellines, of Charlemagne, of city builders, and humanistic understanding of the purposeful striving of the human being at the soul level, an acknowledgement of a soul, the understanding that people are created in the image of God, whatever that means to you. I'm not a theist, but I do believe that we are not mechanistic biological machines. I definitely don't side with that, but I'm not a religious person at all. So at any rate, I think this should be clear now, exactly to the elite. The elite who watch my channel will understand where I'm coming from. So let's just keep going. The central figure of the work of Croce, the key to his usefulness to his British masters, was his circle's mastery of the Italian mythologies. This part's fascinating. I think the central feature of the work. As scientific or scholarly work, Croce's writings on Hegel and aesthetics are infantile rubbish. However, they're not merely rubbish. They represent a model for the nonsense an ignorant, superstitious Italian will tend to swallow. In this way, Croce and his circle made themselves craftmasters of the manipulation of Italy's characteristic mythologies. They are the qualified sheepherders of the sheep of Italy, the sheep who have made up the majority of Italy's myth-ridden population. On this account, it should be readily understood that the notable folly of L'Amalfa's opponents is that they esteem themselves practical politicians. In other words, they are at their best and their worst Machiavellians. As with Machiavelli, in his fatal worst feature, they define the art of ruling as one of bending with the winds of prevailing mythologies, the mythologies employed by their adversaries. They seek to bend the levers of such prevailing mythology, intending so to move political processes into directions which correspond in actuality with the real interests of Italy and its people. By committing such a blunder of practical politics, quote unquote, sometimes termed ductility, they commit themselves to leading within the limits of the sheep pen that La Malfa and his British masters control, the sheep pen of the British-controlled Italian mythologies. There's got to be a department at Cambridge, Oxford, where they plumb the depths of Italian mythology and then devise political programs or agendas to be then conduited into the Italian political scene. A popularized mythology is like a goldfish bowl. No matter how cleverly the fish chooses his direction within the bowl, he can never escape it in such a fashion. No matter how cleverly he adapts to the environment of the bowl's medium, e.g. popular mythologies, whoever moves the bowl moves him in a corresponding direction. The misguided realists, the self-esteemed practical politicians of Italy's humanist forces, regard it as wisdom to maintain influence and credibility in terms of popular political mythologies, to attempt to bend the internal features of enemy-controlled mythologies in the direction agreeable to the interests of the nation and its people. Those for whom La Malfa speaks control the medium within which the humanists so situate themselves. Thus, and not by any advantage of personal prowess, La Malfa has often appeared to win in most of the political crises of Italy to date. The same political arrangement prevails in North America and throughout Western Europe to the present day. It prevails in most of the developing sector and in a somewhat different form in Eastern Europe. Only a relative handful of persons in any nation have knowledge of the true reasons behind the policies currently at issue. The masses, together with most of the persons ordinarily considered national leaders, know only the myths, the mythologies through which their minds and wills are manipulated by others, the institutions of ballot democracy, massive vote frauds momentarily overlooked, have done little to improve this on principle. What does it mean to have the power to vote if massive vote frauds determine the official tallies, or if the knowledge given to the voter is predominantly a myth, and if the voter's criteria for judgment are chiefly mythological? If you, Adelaide, are a typical plebeian, you are still today largely a puppet of those elites which control the shaping and manipulation of your adopted mythologies. The Aristotelian enemies of mankind. For reasons better understood on the basis of the body of this report, the only effective ruling elite in the capitalist sector of the world today has been the neo-Aristotelian faction's inner circles, the inner circles of a force centered in Britain. The humanist elite exists, but with handfuls of exceptions, relatively speaking, chiefly scattered exceptions, lacks the secret knowledge upon which its global effectiveness depends. For reasons we shall identify in due course, the present center of the power of the neo-Aristotelian or oligarchical faction, the Persian model faction, another distinction, is the black Guelph monarchies of Britain and Holland. The power of both monarchies consolidated under the British. So as we account for the black Guelph faction as a whole, we focus here upon its center, the British monarchy. Well, I would call it the administrative center. I think the real power is still in Venice, and it's more, what would you call it, bureaucratic capabilities would be centered in Geneva. One of the most notable frauds afoot in today's credulous world is the myth of British democracy, British constitutional government, quote unquote. Britain has, in fact, two governments. The first, a parliamentary charade for the edification of the credulous, the other, the real monarchical government. I've tried to say this many times to people. People just refuse this absolutely. They won't touch it. Most people. With notable aid from corrupt Presbyterians, the House of Orange and its Amsterdam banking allies overthrew the British Commonwealth in 1660, installing the Dutch puppets, the House of Stuart, upon the British throne. Those Stuarts proved to have several important defects as Dutch puppets. More narrowly, this being typical of the immorality and venality of the Scottish aristocracy generally, the Stuarts sold their favors wherever the market prices suited them, including circles around the French monarchy. More significantly, under James II, the Stuart monarchy was reviving the efforts of the 1640 to 1660 period. The Dutch chose to reorganize the British government preemptively under the direct supervision of the House of Orange. The late 17th century House of Orange had no moral resemblance to its predecessor, William the Silent. The Dutch Neoplatonic humanism of William the Silent had been continued by the De Witt, who was the ally of Benedict Spinoza. The wars between France and Holland had enabled the corrupted House of Orange to oust De Witt's humanists. The late 17th century House of Orange, allied by marriage to the ruling Black Guelph House of Hanover, and otherwise thoroughly committed to Black Guelph policies in its own right, undertook to neutralize the Republican ferment within the larger portion of the English population by instituting the form of theatre known variously as British constitutional monarchy and British liberalism, by giving the credulous British plebeians the thoroughly corrupted to this day British Parliament with which to amuse themselves. The Black Guelph Orange Hanover monarchy preserved to itself all it considered essential respecting the actual government of the United Kingdom. By cultivated popular reputation, the British monarchy is a quaint enclave of ceremonial functions, plugging along quaintly on an annual household budget of a few millions. It, like its associates among the Black Guelph aristocratic families of continental Europe, is reputed by the credulous to exist principally to provide editorial copy for the society pages of certain news media and for those quaint little women's magazines so popular among the brutalized portions of the European population. In reality, the British monarchy defines a domain of special powers and privilege outside the reach of existing practices of parliamentary control. It is screened from inquiry by the doctrine of lèse-majesté and by an arrangement known as the Official Secrets Act. Through the monarchy's own privileged financial activities and through interface with and discretion of both the Bank of England and a select group of private merchant banking families, it is the centerpiece of one of the most powerful financial institutions of the world. It is otherwise armed with extra-parliamentary control of Britain's combined official and unofficial intelligence services, and has de facto as well as some nominal control over the British military. This power is nominally located in the powers and privilege of the incumbent monarch. That aspect of the matter has a certain importance, but represents far too narrow a focus. The British monarchy is best viewed as the rallying point for an assemblage of oligarchical families, both British and Commonwealth nations, and also strata of the allied oligarchical families of Europe. These oligarchical families, together with their most trusted political servants, gather round and behind the screen of the powers and privilege of the British monarchy. Through such and related means, and through the vast networks of influence they have developed among many nations over recent centuries, these combined forces control and deploy one of the most powerful forces on earth, and the most efficiently evil force existing today. The neo-Aristotelian secret knowledge of these oligarchical forces is transmitted to each generation within the privileged strata in principally a threefold way. First, the families themselves transmit their oligarchical tradition, a certain way of viewing the world and its matters of policy. This transmission is both explicit and implicit. Some of the old families of Europe, on both sides of the struggle, have organized memories going back to Charlemagne's time. More characteristically, the reach of tradition is between approximately 4 and 8 centuries. The explicit, formal aspect of the transmission of family traditions centers around glossed genealogies, preferably illustrated with family portraits. More broadly, implicitly, the tradition is transmitted through a kind of drill governing the rearing of the young. Second, the British oligarchical tradition and attitudes are shaped into forms of knowledgeable world outlook in varying degrees of depth and breadth from case to case by Oxford, Cambridge, and Sussex universities. The London School of Economics is chiefly the center for recruiting foreigners to British intelligence service. Parenthetical there. Together with these universities, there are the public schools, which feed into the former. These institutions provide a center and model for the gentleman's education of the oligarchies young throughout the world. Third, the articulation of policies and strategies agreeable to that tradition is accomplished through aid of various think tanks. Oxford, Cambridge, and Sussex universities include privileged domains which are the core of such arrangements. These are the institutions which coordinate the British Secret Intelligence Service, SIS or MI6, MI5, and the London Tavistock Institute, which we've been doing a lot of research into. Other British institutions controlling British policy, including its intelligence services policies, include the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, and the International Institute for Strategic Studies. The British intelligence services operate branches of IISS in many nations, including a part of the New York Council on Foreign Relations and the Aspen Institute in the United States. The Trilateral Commission is predominantly an arm of British intelligence services under the leadership, most notably of Henry Kissinger, who was, incidentally, a knight of the British Empire. The London Tavistock Institute controls the United Nations Organization's World Federation of Mental Health, is the mother and continuing influence of the Rand Corporation, runs the Fabian operation against the United States United Mine Workers Union, and many other institutions, including international terrorist networks in many nations. There's a lot to take in there, but it's a really good, succinct portrait of the framework that is being used. Very effective, and so effective that it's overlooked. You get what I mean, right? It's so effective that people can't see it. It is notable that many persons in high positions in the United States and other nations are both nominally and efficiently British intelligence services agents of influence. The U.S. Labor Party has publicly documented the case of Henry A. Kissinger, the cases of Vice President Walter Mondale, Senator Edward Kennedy, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Werner Michael Blumenthal, James R. Schlesinger, and many others could be added. The Watergate against President Richard M. Nixon was a monstrous hoax set up from both inside and outside the administration by Kissinger, General Alexander Haig, both associated with the P2 Lodge, and other British agents of influence run on the outside, largely by the networks of the Institute for Policy Studies and corrupt complicit elements of the press, themselves either British agents outright or British agents of influence, which now, of course, is much worse. It's completely sealed up now. The United States is only the most important of the nations massively subverted by British intelligence services in this way. The secret knowledge. The core of the knowledge guiding the overall direction of work of British intelligence services is secret knowledge, based ultimately on the classics. This control of secret knowledge is centered in the collectivity represented by an inner intelligentsia of the oligarchical elite, a collectivity centered within Oxford and Cambridge universities. On condition that one knows the classics and also the practical import of the knowledge embodied in them, which admittedly few do, the secret knowledge of British intelligence services stands out as clearly as the sought-for letter stands out to the Whitting personality in the Poe story. Most relevant to this point is evidence proving the distinction between what Oxford and Cambridge know and what they profess publicly to believe. The point is illustrated by the case of Tala's associate Anaximenes. Everybody knows that Anaximenes specified air to be one of the primary constituents of all substance. Yet the Greek term, which Oxford and Cambridge in particular have certified to signify air, has approximately the same meaning as the modern German Geist, mind or spirit, more precisely defined by context of usage. The fraud is so blatant that the translator who perpetrates it shows he is engaged in writing a hoax. He is engaged in a witting hoax. The fraud is so blatant that the translator who perpetrates it shows that he is engaged in a witting hoax. Yet the credulous PhDs and others who piously recite the fraud and interpret Anaximenes from this standpoint have not yet had their degrees revoked, least of all, not by Oxford and Cambridge. Most of the widely accredited textbooks on classical, philosophical, and related topics are riddled with, indeed based upon, blatant hoaxes to the same effect. To get at the real issues of the 4th century BC and earlier, and to trace the consequences of those continuing issues over subsequent centuries into the recent 18th century, one is obliged to discard the largest portion of the accredited secondary sources, quote unquote, as either witting frauds or as a learned fool's glosses on the frauds he pathetically repeats. Focusing for the moment only on the explicitly British conduct of such frauds, instances such as those we cited in connection with Anaximenes prove conclusively that the inner circles centered around Oxford and Cambridge are engaged in an effort to conceal the most vital issues of historical scholarship to their own advantage. By these means, they convert the most vital categories of historical knowledge into the secret knowledge of the inner elites. The elites not duped by the mythologies of the popular universities' classics and political science departments. Once one knows that this fraud exists, sufficient primary and other suitable source documentation exists to reconstruct the core of the truth in these matters, even acknowledging the masses of ancient documents which may be buried away from the honest scholar's view in one fashion or another. Consequently, the bare facts of the secret knowledge do indeed represent a likeness to the case of the purloined letter. The knowledge, admittedly widely scattered, exists in large measure on condition one knows what one is seeking and in what sort of place it is located, in which fashion. That is the principal secret of the British intelligence services, the core of the body of secret knowledge, through which the British and their accomplices have largely ruled the world during recent centuries. We are not to be accused of singling out arbitrarily the 7th through 4th centuries BC in this connection. Once one has understood the crucial issues of that period of civilization and knows how these issues shaped the course of all subsequent history, there exist with certainty no more important secrets to be discovered respecting past or present. That fact will be made clear in the course of this report. We now cite one related important case here. We cite the case of that influential hoax known as the Jewish religion. This might be a good place to stop, but it's hard to stop. The modern Jewish religion originated not with the Kingdom of Solomon or earlier, but centuries later as a synthetic cult created by the order of the Babylonians and other non-Jews. The first step in the fashioning of the Jewish religion was based on piecing together scraps of Mesopotamian legends and anti-Phoenician and anti-Egyptian propaganda with odd pieces of actual Babylonian and other history added into the mixture. The latter infusion gave a credible calendar to the otherwise fraudulent concoction. This original Mesopotamian hoax was reworked repeatedly, always under the supervision of non-Jews, with the basic structure of the Old Testament hoax completed during the Persian Empire period. This hoax was first introduced into European languages around 230 BC on the recommendation of the same Aristotelian peripatetics who contrived the exotic cults of Ptolemaic Egypt, and on orders from the Ptolemies. That edition of the 70 is otherwise notable for the fact that it was produced in a variety of demotic Greek peculiar to such locations as the waterfront brothels of Egypt. Later, when Philo of Alexandria attempted to develop a Platonic version of Judaism, the roots of the later Sephardic tradition of Maimonides and Avencebrol, Philo avoided For obvious political reasons, simply throwing out the mess before him. He attempted to circumvent the problem by the rabbinical, pharisaical ruse of the commentary, tolerating the text while fundamentally altering the reading to be attributed to it. The Christian apostles, confronted with the same general problem, rid Christianity of the worst implications of the Old Testament by emphasizing the dispensation of Christ and warning against the dangers of the concision. Christ had freed man from such barbarisms as the Old Testament. Only those sections of the Old Testament which pointed toward the coming of the Messiah or otherwise happened to coincide with Christianity were to be treated seriously. It does not follow from this that the apostles were in any fashion hoaxers of the Aristotelian varieties. Apostolic Christianity always, and rightly so, regarded Aristotelianism as an organized force of evil, as did the greatest religious thinkers of the European Renaissance. Even Thomas Aquinas belatedly associated himself among such thinkers by acknowledging, during the period before his death, that all the preceding writings had been fundamentally in error. Apostolic Christianity and its leading continuations were always Platonic or Neoplatonic in respect of philosophical method. Aristotelian syncretic methods and Aristotelianism were introduced to Christianity initially by way of the vestiges of the cult of Apollo in the effort of the collapsing Roman Empire to develop an episcopal form of Christianity in conformity with pagan Aristotelian policies for design and use of state religious cults. Although that view is not usually supported with such frankness by published church histories, many leading theologians, notably including Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa of the Renaissance, are explicit on the problem of Aristotelianism. However, those theologians who concur with our judgment have generally regarded it as imprudent to disturb the naive faith of the ignorant with historical problems of this sort. This policy within church circles intersects the fact that both the Platonics and the Aristotelians adhered for opposite reasons to the doctrine of controlling the masses of people through mythologies. Since the point has also fundamental importance for the whole matter of this report, the Platonic view of the cited church practice should be summarized at this point. The Platonic method rightly distinguishes three qualities of knowledge, mental levels, among people. All right, I think we'll stop there. That's a lot. And in the next few days, maybe the next week, digest this, and we will continue.